Text is a pretext, so let us make sure that we remember where we are by looking at verse 13 again. Romans chapter 1, verse 13. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that often I have planned to come to you, and have been prevented so far, so that I may obtain some fruit among you also, just as among the rest of the Gentiles. Let me remind you, we have the book of Romans, if not the greatest book ever written. Some say Matthew is the premier book of the Christian faith and the most important book of the Bible. They're all equally important, but you know what I mean by that. But some say Romans is the most important. Well, it's either Matthew or Romans. Generally, it's what most Christians believe. We have the book of Romans because he'd never been to Rome. He'd always wanted to go, but he'd never been. And the reason that we have this great book is because God said no to Paul's request to go to Rome. Now, he would go 3 years later, but as of right now, God has said no. And it's easy for us to say it was best for Paul for God to say no. And it was good for the Romans that God said no. Since he'd never been there, he put all of his teachings in one book. That's why Romans is so powerful. All the teachings of Paul were in Romans. And that's why it's such an amazing book. But it's easy for us to say God was good to Paul when he said no. He was good to the Romans when he said no. The question of verse 13 is, are you and I okay when God says no to our prayers? That's the question of verse 13. Now we're going to press ahead and we're going to look into the heart of this Greek man. And we're going to see what was it that drove him, what was driving him. There may not be two verses in the Bible back to back that are a better picture of what caused Paul to be successful in the Lord than verses 14 and 15. And so today I'm going to share with you what I think is the driving piston in the life of Paul. We're going to see why he can do such great things. What was it about him that caused him to do so well in the Lord's work? Are you ready? Let's start with verse 14. Verse 14. I am debtor. Boy, I love that. I'm in debt. I am debtor both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. First of all, I am debtor. Greeks refer to people who could speak the Greek language. The Greek language is one of the richest languages of the ancient world. In fact, I'll just go ahead and say it. Greek was the richest language of the ancient world. It had declensions and verb forms and word usage that no other language had. It was rich and beautiful. So Paul says, I am in debt to these people that speak Greek, such a powerful language that had taken over the whole Roman world. And then he said, but now I'm also in debt to barbarians. That's about what the Greeks thought of people who couldn't speak Greek. They thought they were just barbarians. This is Paul's way of saying, I am in debt to people of all languages, wherever they live. Then he said, I am debtor to the wise and the foolish. That means the learned and the unlearned, the cultured and the crude. Paul felt he was in debt to every human being in the planet, irrespective of their nationality, their education, their perceived worth by the world, their social standing. He felt he was in debt. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Do you ever feel that you were in debt to the Russians? What about the North Koreans? Have you ever one time in your life, when you hear the bad news come out of North Korea, thought, well, we owe them? Do you feel that you owe the people who are mean to you? Have you ever in your life felt a sense of debt to the down and out, to the person standing on the street corner begging for money? Have you ever for one moment thought, I owe that person? And so right here we begin to understand one of the main differences between us and Paul. He said, I owe everybody. That's basically the opposite of what's common in our culture today. Students graduate from school and they expect something. I've paid my dues, the world owes me a living. The debutante says, the world owes me fame and glory. A successful person says, the world owes me a hearing. The power hungry, they say, the world owes me influence. The worker says, the world owes me a job. Do you see the difference between Paul and most people today? Do you see the difference between him and most of us in this room? He's saying, I owe every human being I meet. But the reigning thought of our era is the world rotates around us. We are the world's creditor. The world owes us. The world shall feel honored that we are here. The world owes us. And Paul threw that apple cart upside down. If the world ever owed anyone anything, it was to Paul. He gave his all to better humanity. If you were to make a list of the 10 most important human beings who ever lived, you'd have to put Paul the Apostle in there somewhere. I'm talking of all religions, all the world. If you had to pick 10, you'd have to put Paul in there somewhere. And yet he said, the world doesn't owe me a thing. I owe everybody. There's something about a sense of duty, a sense of obligation, a sense of debt. I have to do this. They can bring forth greatness. One of the greatest writers of the English language was Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott invented a genre. He invented historical fiction. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And he was able to do it because he was driven to write. There was something inside of him that he could not control. One time, he was so fever-ridden, he was almost delirious. He tried to rest. And finally, he got so frustrated, he said to his servant, this is foolish. Bring me the pens and the paper. For 2 years, he was so painfully sick with a kidney ailment that he couldn't write. He couldn't sit down and hold a pen. So for 2 years, while he's suffering with his kidney ailment, he dictated 3 novels. 3 of his most famous novels, one of them, Ivanhoe. When he was 59, he had a stroke. He kept writing. When he was 60, he had a second stroke. He wrote 2 more novels. His doctor said, you need to take a Mediterranean cruise. He got halfway through it, said, I'm going home. And he went back to writing. Why? Because he felt this sense, something inside of him was pushing him. Something was forcing him, compelling him to come and to write. He felt a debt. He felt a duty. He felt he had to do this. There's something about that sense of duty, of being driven, that can cause us to serve others well. All of us in this room, we're in debt to others. Most of us did not fight for the freedoms that we enjoy. Most of us did not write the laws that provide a good, worthy life for us. There are other people who had to work hard to make this country possible. There are other people who had to make our jobs possible. We would be terribly handicapped without the influence of those who have gone before us. We cannot repay them. I cannot repay the men and women who fought for my country and for my freedom. I do not know them. Many of them are dead. They're gone. I cannot repay them. And yet I am in debt to them, and every great person who has ever lived realizes that they must come to the place where they are giving to the world as much as they have received from the world. There is no greatness till you cross a line and you are driven to give more than you have received. This is so extremely important in our understanding of life. And our social obligations to others are nearly as important as our spiritual obligations, and that's what Paul is referring to here. The instant Paul got saved, he knew he was in debt to Jesus. And yet he knew he could not repay Jesus. What are you going to do for Jesus? You're going to give him all your wealth. He owns a cattle on 1,000 hills. Have you checked the price of beef lately? What are you going to do for Jesus? How do you repay Jesus? How do you give him unto him? Well, he has said that the way that you repay him is that you be good to the people that he loves, the people who are dying, going to hell. Paul immediately understood, I cannot repay you, Jesus, but I am in debt to you. And you want me to repay my debt to you by paying, by helping, by trying to win people from hell, these people that you died for and you love. That's what you do. You repay Jesus by looking to the people he loves, lost people, the people who are going to hell when they die, and you try to bless them. That's how you repay Jesus. That's what Paul is saying when he said, I owe Jesus. There's a great story in the Bible to illustrate this. When David's son Absalom drives him out, Absalom rebels against his father, drives him out. There's an old man on the other side of the Jordan River where Paul is fleeing, running for his life. He gets away, his family, he gets as far away as he can to save his life. When he goes across the river, there's an old man named Barzillai. He's 80 years old. And it is Barzillai, the wealthy man, who gives food, clothing, protection. He protects David, takes care of David, is good to David while his father's winning the rebellion. But once the civil war is over and David has won, David goes back to the Jordan River and is getting ready to go back to Jerusalem, and Barzillai goes with him. And Barzillai, the old man, stops at the Jordan River, and David says, come, and I will take care of you. Come, live in the palace. I'll repay you. I owe you. And Barzillai says, no, I'm old, but here's my servant, Chimham. Would you take him and bless him? Repay me through him. So David takes Chimham, and then that's not the end of the story. When David comes to die, and he's giving the last instructions to Solomon, he says to Solomon, remember Barzillai and his family. David understood, even though Barzillai would not receive anything directly, he owed Barzillai, and he would repay Barzillai through his children. That's the way it is with Jesus. You don't have anything to give him to impress him. So he says to you, I have some people down there that I died for. I have some people that I don't want to go to hell. And the cross gives them value. I died for them just as much as I died for you. And you cannot repay me. But I want you to know you are in debt. You are in debt to every human being on the planet that's going to hell. You owe every human being in this world, you owe them something. When you have the medicine for the sickness, you are immediately in debt. When Pasteur discovered bacteria spread disease, he suddenly was in debt to let the whole world know. When Edward Jenner discovered the smallpox vaccine, he was in debt immediately. He had to let the world know. Jonas Salk, when he discovered the polio vaccine, I still remember, I was about 5 years old, I still remember standing in the hot summer sun at the Benton Courthouse, Benton, Missouri, standing in a long line stretched down the sidewalk to get our vaccine against polio. I was about 5 or 6 years old. I just remember, that's all I remember, is standing out there in that long line. Jonas Salk never made a dime off of that. Never applied for a patent, never asked for anything. He knew he was in debt the moment he found the cure for polio. And that's the way it is with us. The world around us needs spiritual healing. Folks, do you understand how lost people are? Do you understand how lost they are? They don't understand what it means to be married. They live together without marriage thinking that's a new way of being married, that's a new way of being single. It has nothing to do with being married. There is no marriage till there's a covenant, till there's a lifetime contract. They really think they're going to be happy doing that. People taking drugs, they really think that's the best way to live. They truly do. Do you not understand? There's only one hope for people, and that is that they would come to know Jesus. He's the only hope for the world. You have the medicine, they have the disease. Therefore, you owe them, just like Paul owed the Romans. Now, when I was a young preacher, I read a story that has stuck with me all through the years. It's a horrible story. During one of Britain's civil war, a governor was found guilty of treason and was sentenced to death by the Queen. An appeal was made on his behalf. Some people felt that he didn't need to die. And so the Queen changed her mind and she wrote a pardon for the governor. Unfortunately, the pardon on its way to the governor, the pardon fell into the hands of the governor's worst enemy. He took the pardon and he locked it away until after the execution, and then he sent it. Now, that story just horrifies me. The very thought that you would have in your hand the pardon to let somebody live, and yet you would lock it away and let them die, that's a horrible story. And yet, is it not true that in some way that story is our story? That we've been entrusted with the pardon that spares people from hell. It's available. It's for everybody. It's designed for everybody. Jesus died for everybody. And we must get it to them, but we will not do it until we feel a sense of debt. Till we can say, I am debtor to that person. I am debtor to that drug addict. I am debtor to that person who's in sexual sin. I am in debt. I'm not their judge. God is their judge. I am their debtor. I owe them. Ruth and I have been married 51 years now. As I've shared with you, about 46 years ago, when we first got married, I took care of the finances. I have a degree in mathematics. Since we thought that makes sense, I'd take care of the numbers. It was a disaster. We were always behind in our bills. We couldn't. It was awful. And one day I was reading Proverbs 31. And Proverbs 31, talking about a godly woman, said the woman took care of all the business. She bought and sold and took care of all the finances. And so it was in reading Proverbs 31 that I decided to turn all of our finances over to Ruth. So for 45 years or more, Ruthie has handled the money. I handle the calendar. She takes care of the money. I take care of the calendar. Now, God used Ruthie to allow us to retire very well. Our goal was when we retired to have zero debt. Credit card, cars, house, the whole deal, everything. No debt. We made it. And we barely made it, but we made it. And it's because of Ruthie's leadership in that area of finances. Now, let me tell you the trait of Ruthie. If Ruthie were to find out that there was a bill due yesterday and she forgot to pay it, if she could, she would crawl on her hands and knees to pay that debt. She is driven by a sense of debt. That's what Paul is saying here. He's saying, just like you would never get behind on a debt, I am in debt. All those lost people. So, a sense of obligation is a powerful way to serve the Lord. One of the reasons that I dwell on this is because I was helped raised by a grandfather. My mother's daddy lived by one word, duty. He fought in both world wars. When his grandsons were almost killed in a car wreck late on a Saturday night, and he was up almost all night trying to get them in the hospital and all that taken care of. 2 hours later, he's up getting dressed, and my grandmother says, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm going to church." He was driven like that, always by duty. And that's what Paul is saying here. I am in debt. Now, you can do a great work if you feel that you're in debt. But now look at verse 15. Look at what else you need. Look at verse 15 now. That's only half the story. Verse 15. So, for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. Do you see that? See, you can do duty with drudgery, dread it, not like it. But for Paul, it was duty with delight. He said, this is no burden. This is no problem. I want to do this. I feel the most neglected verse in the Bible for godly living. You ready for this? You ready for this? This is important. The most neglected verse in the New Testament for godly living is Philippians 2:13. Not 4:13, which says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which is the most often misinterpreted verse in the Bible. He's only talking about contentment there and satisfaction, not talking about doing other things. All he's talking about is being contented in Jesus, but that's okay. Why did I get off on that? I don't know. The most important verse is Philippians 2:13, where Paul said, God gives us the desire and the power to do what pleases Him. I have been saying for years that most Christians, the reason they fail in their prayer life is they don't know where to start. Oh, God, help me serve you better. Oh, God, help me witness to the lost. Oh, God, help me be faithful. Oh, God, help me to tithe. You're missing the whole point. Philippians 2:13 says that God starts by giving you the desire. You need to be praying, God, make me want to tithe. God, make me want to not be a liar. God, make me want to win souls. You're missing the whole point if you leave out desire. You see, you can say, I'm a debtor and know it and have a sense of duty and never do a thing, but it is the desire. When God gives you the burning desire, duty and delight, when you get the two together, that's when nothing will stop you from serving the Lord. When you get to where you know what your duty is and you want to do it, you're burning up with gladness and joy. You're eager. You're excited. That's when you'll do a great work for God. That's what drove Paul the Apostle. Duty, delight. His whole life is a combination of the two. He's on Damascus Road. He's going to go kill him some Christians. He's excited about it. And what happens? He gets knocked to the ground by a bright light. He hits the ground. First thing he says is, who are you, Lord? I love that. If you'll just give me a name, we'll take care of things from here on. And then the Lord said, I'm Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Why are you kicking against the pricks? Why are you doing this? And then he says, what would you have me do? Do you see from the first moment, Paul said, what is my duty? Then what did he do? He got up, he went into Damascus, and he started preaching. Nobody told him to preach. Nobody made him preach. Nobody said you're supposed to preach. He started preaching. See, that's delight. Duty. What should I do? I think I'll go preach. Then God said, no, you're not ready to preach yet. I'm going to send you down to the desert. So he goes to the desert into Arabia for 3 years. Lord, help us. Paul had to spend 3 years in the desert. 3 years in Arabia alone with God, getting rewired, retooled. See, that's duty. But then, after he's stoned almost to death in Lystra, he goes to the next town, and what does he do? A few days later, he comes back to make sure the Christians are doing okay. That's delight. When he saw the vision of the man from Macedonia, do you remember that? On the second missionary journey, Paul's going through Asia Minor, which is now Turkey, and he keeps going through, and he keeps thinking, well, I should turn here. And the Spirit said, no, no, no. And, well, maybe I should stop here. No, 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 no. Keep going. So here's Paul. He gets over to the end of Asia, to the town of Troas. He's an Asian, and he has a vision of a man in Macedonia right across the sea in Europe. Oh, my goodness. Paul's an Asian from Tarsus right here, trained in Jerusalem right here. He never dreamed he was going to go over here. But when he saw the Macedonian called, he saw the man of Macedonia say, come and help us. He did his duty. He left home. He left his territory. He left his culture. He went across that little sea. And you are in church today because Paul did his duty. You are here today. You are in this church building because Paul the Apostle did his duty and went into Europe. But then, when the saints at Jerusalem are struggling, he takes an offering from the people of Macedonia and he gives it to them. It's his delight. Duty, delight, duty, delight, duty and delight. If you don't have both, you're not going to do a great work for God. You have to have both to push you and to drive you. The greatest story in my life of duty and delight is the story of David Brainerd. I read the story of David Brainerd when I was about 22, 23, 25 years old maybe, and I was forever affected. David Brainerd died at age 29. Now listen to me. David Brainerd died at age 29, and yet he was the driving influence in the life of William Carey, the founder of the modern missions movement. He was the driving influence in the life of Adoniram Judson, the founder of American missions. He was the driving force in the life of Jim Elliot. You remember him, 1956, died in Ecuador. He was a driving force in the life of John Wesley. John Wesley required every Methodist minister in the world to read the diary of David Brainerd. Brainerd died at 26 and 29. 29. He started his ministry at 26, died at 29. What in the world can you do in 3 years to change the whole history of the world? David Brainerd was a missionary to the Delaware Indians. He was only able to minister 3 years because he had tuberculosis. He was really sick. The Indians would years later, for years, they would tell the white traders who would come in to do trading business, the Indians would tell of the white man who during the snowstorms, sweating through his clothing, he'd be with fever, he'd be down on the ground praying for them and coughing his tubercular bloody lungs into the snow. He loved these people. He said, when I slept, all I could think of was the conversion of the Delaware. He said, when I woke up, it's all that I could concentrate on. For 3 years, he labored 3 years. He never quit having fits of fever, cold sweats, constantly suffered pains in his head, his chest, his back, nausea, weakness, uneasiness. He preached standing up until he was too weak. He started preaching sitting down. Then when he couldn't preach sitting down, they would carry him on a pallet. They'd bring him over and they'd lay him down, and he'd preach lying down. When his voice began to fail, he would have one of the Indians kneel down, and he would whisper in his ear the gospel, and then the Delaware would turn and preach to the others what Brainerd had said. When finally he had to go to Jonathan Edwards' house for healing, he was going to die. It was obvious. They took him to the home of the great preacher, Jonathan Edwards. They took him to Jonathan Edwards' home. What he would do, he would write letters to the Delaware. Then, when he was too weak to write, he would dictate letters to the Delaware through John Edwards' daughter, Jerusha. That's another sad story, Brainerd and Jerusha. I was reading that story again last night just to refresh my memory. That's another terrible tragedy. But anyway, he would quote these, he would just dictate to Jerusha, and Jerusha would write those letters for him. And then Jonathan Edwards said that when David Brainerd went into his final coma, and he was mumbling that he was praying for the Delaware. And it was Jonathan Edwards who took all of his diary, all of his journals, put them in one book, and gave them to the world. That's how he changed the world. Now, here's the last thing that Brainerd ever wrote in his diary. I declare, now I am dying. I would not have spent my life otherwise for the whole world. Duty, delight. I'm debtor. I am eager. By the way, Jerusha and David Brainerd were buried side by side in the churchyard near where Jonathan Edwards lived. That's another story. You can read that on your own. Now, verse 15, and then we're going to quit. We're going to quit. We're going to quit. We're going to quit. Listen, when you get a preacher who has nothing to lose by preaching a long sermon, you're in trouble. All right, verse 15. Here we go. I have nothing to lose. I'm out of here in 3 weeks anyway. So, for my part, I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also in Rome. He's crazy. The man's nuts. Paul is verifiably insane. He's crazy. He says, here's what I'm going to do, Romans. I'm going to come to Rome, a city drunk on its own pride, a city vain beyond any human imagination. I'm coming to the imperial city. And I'm going to preach the gospel. The gospel is the short term for the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. That's what the gospel means, death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. He says, I'm going to come to Rome. And I'm going to tell the Romans right in the shadow of Caesar's palace that the real king is the man that your Pontius Pilate killed years ago in the backwater part of the empire that nobody cares about. They probably didn't even know who Pontius Pilate was, much less who Jesus of Nazareth was. And Paul says, I'm coming, and I am going to make a difference. Julius Caesar, Alexander, Napoleon, they marched with armies. Do you realize how Paul marched into Rome? Do you remember how he got there? The Jews in Jerusalem wanted to kill him. And he sent word, I'm not going to stand on trial there. And they said, I am a Roman citizen, therefore I'm going to Rome. He had the right as a Roman citizen to appeal to Caesar's tribunal, to Rome. So Paul went to Rome at government expense in chains. Don't forget this. Don't lose this. He says, I'm coming to tell you who the real king is. And he comes walking in, not in a big parade, not in some big show. He comes in chains. The Christians, they find out he's coming. And so one delegation came down 40 miles down the Appian Way. You can still ride the Appian Way, one of those roads that the Roman soldiers built 10 feet deep. They dig those channels, and they're still used today. 40 miles, they came down to meet him in chains. Went another 10 miles, another group comes down from Rome to meet him. He's encouraged, and he's blessed. And he said, I'm coming because I'm going to preach the gospel of Jesus. And boy, was he successful. Let's put it this way. Within 300 years of his arrival, 1,750,000 Christians had been buried in the catacombs. 1,750,000 Christians. And what did he do? All right? Now listen to me. Now you hear me now. He said, I'm going to come with a message that has to do with salvation, that tells people how to be saved. And I'm going to tell people that they each individually, they must believe in the Lord. And so I'm going to come and I'm going to preach to individuals. He did not talk about politics. There's a place for us being involved in politics. We want, because the Christian way is the best way to live, therefore we ought to be involved in politics. But revival is never going to come on Air Force One. It's never going to come through Congress. It's never going to come through the Supreme Court. Always remember that when you are pushing politically, that's okay for government and for society, but it has no bearing whatsoever on the power of the kingdom. The Church of Jesus Christ is not dependent on the United States government. The church is dependent on Jesus, period. It has power unto itself. Now, so here's what Paul said. I'm going to come with a message. And my message is that the line between good and evil is not between people groups, but inside every individual's heart. You see, if you believe that the line between good and evil is between groups, I'll give you a good example from politics. While we're talking about politics. If you're a Republican, you have a tendency to draw a line between good and evil, and you say the Republicans are good, Democrats are bad because they don't believe in, they believe it's okay to have an abortion, okay? Well, guess what? There are Democrats, they draw the line between good and evil, and they say, well, the Republicans are evil because they don't do enough for the poor, they're both sides, Christians on both sides. And so what happens is, if you draw the line between good and evil, between groups, you always put yourself on the good side, always. You draw the line between the good and the bad, you always put yourself on the good side, and then there's the evil on the other side. And therefore, since it's good versus evil, these now are your enemies. These are your opponents. Rather than debt, rather than I owe them, I'm opposed to them. Here's what Paul came into Rome saying. The line between good and evil is right here. In every human being's heart. Every human being is made in the image of God. Therefore, they do good things. Every human being is affected by the fall of humanity. Therefore, they do bad things. And sometimes we yield more to the good. Sometimes we yield more to the bad. But the line between good and evil always is not between you and someone else. Always here. And every human being you meet. Every human being. Fellow Republican, fellow Democrat, fellow old person, fellow young person. The line between good and evil is right here. And therefore, you come to them with a gospel message to try to get them to lean to the good, to be saved, to have faith, for it is their only hope. Because even if they get saved, they're going to still go back and forth. Depravity is still real, still a problem. But we know the cure is not in some great political system, not in some great social issues, even though we need to be involved socially. You all know my heart, you know that. But the ultimate issue is, I am debtor. All these people, I owe them. I am eager. I want to make a difference. I want to do this. And what am I going to do? I'm going to share the gospel. I'm going to tell people that right here is the line. And they must choose Jesus or not. Here is the line. Never here, always here. I love being an interim pastor.